Jordan Diaz, and my presentation today is whether or not violent video games affect our youth. Before I start with that, I'm going to talk about the birth of video games. One of the first video games was Pong, which is pretty much a digital version of ping pong, and that was in 1972. And in 1985 you have Pac-Man, not very violent. After that, games became a little bit more violent. Late 80s, early 90s, you have games like Mortal Kombat, Guerrilla Warfare. They're two-dimensional, not much graphics. Now in 2016, you have games with lots of graphics, lots of gore, and they're very realistic. 4K displays, it's almost like real life. A lot of these violent video games involve killing, the heavy use of profanity, sexual content, drug use, and most of them are deal with real world play and first person shooting. So you're pretty much immersed in these games. You can do whatever you want. You're just in a virtual life, virtual reality. Now, why is this important? Statistics show that 97% of our youth, ages 12 to 17, have played violent video games, and about 90% of the games for children 10 or older contain some sort of violence. Boys tend to play video games more frequently than girls do as well. Do these violent video games cause aggression? The American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry believe that violent video games can contribute to real-life violent behaviors and can harm children in many ways. However, research has shown that as violent video game sales have soared, FBI crime statistics went down. Dr. Christopher Ferguson conducted research on the correlation between school shooters and their use of violent video games, but the research was inconclusive due to their predisposed personality traits. The U.S. Department of Justice funded the Center for Mental Health and Media at the Massachusetts General Hospital because they wanted to determine the impact violent video games had on our youth. Studies showed that in some cases, children behaved more aggressively after playing these games. However, the majority did not become more aggressive. In fact, the majority of the cases shown show that the use of these violent video games are a normal part of development. So some variables to consider when dealing with children who play violent video games are their personality, their situation, and their motivation. 3 personality traits that can make someone more aggressive or are more prone to be aggressive after playing violent video games are neuroticism, disagreeableness, and low levels of conscientiousness. Dr. Patrick Mackey and Dr. Charlotte Mackey have presented this evidence and show that most children are actually not affected and are not more aggressive after playing these games. Another study shows that children with older siblings are twice as likely to play violent video games, and children who have video game systems located in their bedrooms are more prone to playing these violent video games. Dr. Mizuko Ito, a cultural anthropologist from the University of California, studied online gaming behavior among children and adolescents. He found that violent video games are ubiquitous among online players, and boys find it to be fun, and they use it to combat boredom. It changes the way these young people learn and the way they socialize. They're motivated to compete, and it's essentially like roughhousing or playing like wrestling. Despite what parents think, they think these video games make them less social and keep them in the house all the time, but it's actually quite the opposite. A study by Anderson and Bushman in 2004 concluded that violent video games can cause physiological desensitization to real-life violence, so it isn't all good. 2 emotional responses adults and children get when presented to violent media are fear and anxiety. However, when violent stimuli is presented with positive emotions, these initial emotions are reduced. Games like Call of Duty, where you get points for killing people, and eventually they become desensitized to this kind of violence. So most of these people who are desensitized are usually less sympathetic to victims of violence, and they are less likely to notice aggressive events. Researchers had participants play violent video games and non-violent video games for 20 minutes, and then they made them watch a 10-minute video of real-life violence while their heart rate and galvanic skin responses were measured. The experiment concluded that those who played the violent video games had a lower heart rate and galvanic skin response while they viewed the real-life violent video, as opposed to those who didn't play the violent video games, causing physiological desensitization. So violence in video games can both be good and bad for children and teens. It's a normal part of development, especially in boys. However, it can cause physiological desensitization. And predisposed traits such as personality traits and various environmental factors can also can affect how violence is viewed by these children and teens, and it can play on how their behaviors are. And that's about it.